We will, of course, record this. So over to Tanja's presentation now, which is all about horse happiness and how we perceive that as owners. So many interesting takeaways for everybody from this. It's a really interesting talk. And as we said with all the rest of them, stick your questions in the chat. Right, I will move out of the way and we will watch and enjoy this one.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me today. For the next 30 minutes, I will be speaking about our most recent study, which investigated equestrians' perceptions of horse happiness or positive emotions in horses. My co-authors were Hayley Randall from Charles Sturt University in Australia and Jane Williams from Hartbury University in the UK. First of all, let's take a look at the definition of happiness. How is happiness defined? In general, we can say that happiness is a subjective feeling, which means each of us experiences happiness in a different way. There are also individual as well as intra and interspecies differences. So each species and each individuum defines or experiences happiness differently. Sometimes happiness is also defined as the presence of pleasure and the absence of pain. And particularly in humans, and since a few years in animal literature as well, happiness is often equated with life satisfaction, subjective well-being, and the quality of life concept. Now, when we want or try to define happiness in animal welfare science, the definition is much more inconsistent. First of all, it can be very problematic because we can't simply ask an animal, how do you feel? How happy do you think? Rate on a scale from 1 to 5. That's unfortunately not possible. So therefore, it's a bit more tricky to identify objective measures to assess and interpret happiness or positive emotions in animals. But in animal welfare science literature, happiness often refers to the presence of pleasure, the absence of physical and mental pain, the existence of predominantly positive life experiences, which ultimately lead to positive emotions. And some authors also refer to a short-term affective state or mood. I would just like to add that, of course, we are trying to keep our horses pain-free or stress-free most of the time, but sometimes it's just not possible. For instance, when your horse is injured and it needs to see the veterinarian, so it might be a bit stressed and in pain. But overall, it does not mean that the horse experiences bad welfare at that moment. It's basically finding or trying to avoid negative events and encouraging or trying to enrich your horse's life with positive life events that can lead to happiness and good welfare. So why is it so important for us horse people, equestrians, veterinarians, or professionals to know about signs of happiness in horses and also to recognize them? Well, as mentioned previously, horses, like any other animals, can't self-report their affective states or emotions. So therefore, it's up to us humans to subjectively assess their well-being and their emotional states. We also know that horses communicate through behaviors and vocalizations. So horses may tell us through the way they behave and sometimes through certain vocalizations how they feel. And more about this later. And now it's up to us equestrians to correctly interpret and assess the horse's emotional states, which can be pretty tricky, as we already know, because we may just interpret their emotional states based on our experiences, individual views and so on. So that can be a bit tricky, and we have to be careful when we describe horse emotional states. The problem is that an incorrect interpretation or assessment can actually compromise our horse's welfare, and therefore the ability to identify affective states, on the contrary, can help enhance welfare. So as a rule of thumb, overall, positive affective states can indicate good welfare. And again, of course, we can't always ensure that the horse is pain-free or stress-free, but it's more like you're trying to avoid the bad events and you're trying to create environments in which the horses can have positive experiences that lead to happiness and ultimately good welfare. Now, what's the link between happiness and good welfare? As we all know, managing horses in semi-artificial or artificial environments can negatively impact their welfare. Unfortunately, although we have plenty of scientific evidence that actually tells us what type of husbandry practices are needed or management practices are needed for our horses to experience good lives, traditions and maybe financial restraints still put horses in situations, in management situations, where they may experience bad welfare. For instance, in many riding schools and boarding barns, horses are still housed in single box stalls for a large proportion of the day, and some of them may not be turned out long enough, and also they may be turned out alone without having any contact to other horses, which is very important for them to experience positive emotions. And therefore, in the 1960s already, the 5 Freedoms framework was created, and it helped to define minimum welfare standards for animals that were kept in artificial environments and farm animals. So basically, the 5 Freedoms framework provided people like farmers and equestrians with minimum information about what the horses or animals need to have that time a good life. Things have changed. And the 5 freedoms also only refer to the absence of something. For instance, the absence of freedom from pain, freedom from hunger, and freedom from thirst. And it does not include the any positive affective states, and it forgets actually to take into consideration that there is much more needed for horses or animals in general to experience a good life, and that meeting the minimum requirements is just not enough for horses to experience good welfare. And therefore, in the 1990s, the 5 domains model was developed, and the most current version includes the affective states of animals. So that's a very important factor that is now being considered when we assess animal welfare and horse welfare, of course. And the good thing is that the 5 domains model is frequently updated and always incorporates the newest scientific findings and evidence-based information into their improvements. And therefore, in the past, when we spoke about good welfare, it only meant meeting minimum standards or minimum requirements. And good welfare now, today, focuses on an animal-based approach and the quality of life concept. So it's not just enough when you give your horse some feed and it gets a clean stall, and maybe it's being turned out a few hours a day. Now it's about providing the horse with a good quality of life through enrichments, through enabling the horse to experience positive emotions, positive affective states, such as happiness. And therefore, when we talk about a good life, it is always associated with the presence of positive affective states, such as happiness and pleasure, which ultimately leads to good welfare. So here you can see a Lusitano breeding stallion, and this breeding stallion is box walking, and it's not just an incident that you observe once or twice. He did this for a very long time because he was locked into his stall for many hours per day, and he also was always turned out alone without any contact to other horses. So his way of coping with the negative stress and isolation and insufficient turnout is box walking. So this horse definitely does not experience good welfare. Now, what are indicators of positive affective states in horses? Well, luckily, we already know a little about it because some researchers already investigated this topic a bit. For instance, we know that certain affiliative behaviors can indicate good welfare or positive affective states. And when I speak about affiliative behaviors, I refer to social behaviors, such as some horses may form friendships with others. And what researchers have found out is that those horses always graze in proximity up to 30 centimeters close. And this is one indicator of positive emotions in horses. And so is allogrooming. And we know that allogrooming not only helps horses to maintain a shiny and clean coat. Based on studies that were conducted a few years ago, we know that allogrooming also can lower the heart rate and may lower stress. So even when you as a human rider or horse owner groom your horse in certain areas, particularly around the withers, you may actually help your horse to relax and to experience positive emotions. And then you may have heard that some horses, they snort when they relax. For instance, when you ride your horse and after a warm up or during the warm up, it may just suddenly relax the muscles and it may snort. That's a very good sign because then your horse is relaxed and in a positive affective state. And we also know that certain vocalizations, such as whinnies, may indicate positive affective states in horses. Now, again, we have to be very careful that we do not interpret the absence of pain indicators as indicators of happiness, because as we all know, there are certain reliable pain indicators based on Sue Dyson's research, such as a very tight muscle and triangular shaped wrinkles in the frontal portion of the horse's eye. So these indicators can actually tell us that the horse is in pain or experiencing distress. And just because these indicators are missing does not mean that the horse actually is happy or experiences good emotions or positive emotions. So therefore, we have to be very careful with our interpretation. Now, there are a few factors we must consider when we assess our horse's affective states. As we all know, the way we interpret or view good welfare can vary, and there are individual, intercultural, and also differences between genders. For instance, we know based on other studies that men in general, again, may perceive welfare differently than women. So overall or on average, men have a less compassionate view of welfare compared to women. And another problem is that based on your culture maybe as well, or your background, even your socio-economic background may play a role in this. You may interpret welfare differently than your neighbor or your best friend. So this is all something we have to consider when we talk about welfare and when we try to improve welfare in our horses. Another problem is that we humans tend to project our own subjectively perceived emotions onto our companion animals. And that does not only apply to horses, but also to dogs, cats, or any other animals or pets we keep. And this somehow may fog our lenses, like it may make us blind. We may see things through rose-colored glasses. So therefore, it's very important that we always try to assess emotions objectively, which is very difficult, of course, but we should really focus on what we see and not what we think we see based on our emotions. And then, of course, with, or as it is the case in many other situations, bias again also may be a problem when we assess emotional states. So is anthropomorphism, because anthropomorphism, which means the attribution of human character traits, personality traits, and behaviors to animals, can also cloud the way we view, interpret, and assess our horse's welfare. And just to summarize, it's really difficult to objectively report and assess what we can see, which means to describe the actual behavior, and not to already start to interpret the behavior we think we see. And the best example may be your riding school horse that seems to be lazy. So spectators may call it lazy, or the student may call it lazy, but there are different reasons behind a horse. Whoops, I think I'm losing my second. Hello again. My bulb light just died, so I had to take a little break and yeah, fix my lighting here. Yeah, so let's just continue where we stopped. Sorry for that. Okay, so since we don't really know a lot yet about how equestrians perceive happiness or positive emotions in their horses, we thought it's time to investigate this topic, and we created a survey that comprised 25 questions and made this survey available online. And our questions were divided into 3 different sections. The first looked at participant demographics such as age and nationality. The second section looked at study participants' perception of happiness in general, horse happiness in general. And we also linked this to given scenarios, and more about it later. And in the third section of our survey, we provided the participants with certain situations or scenarios that were based on the 5 domains model, for instance, concerning turnout, feeding, and training of horses, but more again later. Let's look at our demographics. So we received 332 valid answers. And again, our survey was in English language, or was offered in English language only. And the mean age of our participants was 44 years. A larger number of our participants were Canadian and British, and 24 different nationalities in total participated in our study. A huge number were female, actually 97%, but that's a quite common phenomenon when we look at equestrian surveys, because we know that equestrianism is much more popular amongst females compared to males. And 86% of all our study participants were horse owners. Half of the participants said that they hold horse-related qualifications. So based on that, you may hypothesize that the participants in general were quite experienced, or at least knowledgeable, when it comes to horses. 63% were leisure riders, and about 1/3 were competitive riders or show riders. And 62% indicated that they have more than 20 years of horse-related experience. So overall, our sample was pretty well, or quite experienced in horses. Okay, so how did the participants assess and interpret general happiness or horse happiness. The first question we asked them was if they know if the horse is happy. So a very large proportion, 94% of all participants, thought that they would be able to recognize when their horses are happy. And only 6% thought that they are not able to recognize happiness in their horses. And in question 12, we asked the participants to tell us, in their opinion, how happy their horse is in general. Again, that's the perception, it's not reality. So 41% said that their horses are very happy, and 51.5% thought their horses are somewhat happy. So as you can see, a very large proportion, almost 93% of our participants thought that their horses overall can be described as happy. And only 1.5% thought their horses are somewhat unhappy, with 1.2% saying that their horses are very unhappy. So the percentage of participants believing that the horses are unhappy is less than 3%. And 4.5% thought they would not really know if the horses are happy or not. Okay, and this is a summary to a different question, to question 12, which was divided in 3 parts. And we asked the study participants if they believe that their horses are happy when they ride them, when they interact with them, and when they work them. Interaction was defined as, for instance, grooming or positive reinforcement training. Riding is clear. And working them was defined as, for instance, free lunging, free jumping, and exercise in general, but unmounted exercise. So when you look at the results, you can see that a very large proportion, almost 92% of our participants, thought that the horses are happy when they interact with them. The numbers change a bit when it comes to their perception of happiness when they ride them, with almost 70% believing the horses are happy when they are being ridden. And almost 81% thought that the horses are happy when they work them. So on this slide, I just picked a few of our significant findings. There were a bit more, but I thought those findings may be the most interesting ones. For instance, 98% of all participants who believed they would be able to recognize when their horses are happy also believed that their horses are happy when they interact with them. And 88.5% of competitive riders, which is like a very huge number, believe that their horses are happy when they ride them. So this belief seems to be very prominent amongst competitive riders in our sample. And 92% of participants with more than 20 years of horse-related experience believe their horses would be happy when they work them. Now the question is, or the question that we have to ask ourselves is, are our horses really happy when we interact with them, when you ride them, or when you work them? Now, thanks to the findings of previous studies, we already know a little bit about this, and there are already clues, available evidence-based information that can help us find answers to this question. For instance, what we know from previous studies is that horses in general probably do not enjoy strenuous exercise or intense exercise. And that's also based in the nature, because when you observe herds or bands of horses in the wild, you can see that they spend most of the time in walk and grazing, so up to 16 hours a day, and they rarely run continuously for more than a few minutes, and only most of the time also when they are on the go or something happened to them. So it's somehow part of the nature to not exercise intensely. And based on findings of so-called preference test studies or preference tests, we know that horses preferred to return to their stalls over being ridden. So horses in this study were given the choice between A, you can go to your stall, or B, you will be ridden. So the horses in this study definitely preferred the stall rest over being ridden. So that might give us some clues as to that horses may not really enjoy being ridden. At least they prefer stall rest over being ridden. And in another study, the researchers observed that horses showed a much higher motivation to feed or to spend time with other horses than being worked or exercised. But there's some good information as well. For instance, we know that horses may actually enjoy interaction with humans, such as being groomed or positive reinforcement training. So not everything we do with them is bad. So we can actually also contribute to life quality and positive experiences. And based on studies involving pets, such as cats and dogs, we know that pet ownership in general increases subjective well-being and happiness in humans. And it even goes that far that petting cats or dogs can reduce heart rate variability and blood pressure in humans. So pets in general can have a very positive impact on our subjective well-being. And therefore, which might be the case in equestrians, horse riders may also project their own self-experienced feelings of happiness or positive emotions when they spend time with their horses onto their mounts. And therefore, they may incorrectly perceive horses to be happy when they ride them. Okay, so this is the result of a word cloud analysis based on answers given to question 11. And in question 11, we ask our study participants to describe in a few words how they know that their horse is happy. And a word cloud analysis filters out the most frequently used words. And as you can see, ear, eye, body language, facial expression, willingness, and so on were the most frequently mentioned words in the answers given by our study participants. But as you can see, ear, eye, facial expression, we know based on other studies that those indicators actually tell us when the horse is experiencing negative emotions such as pain, or neutral. So if you talk about a relaxed eye, it may not necessarily mean that the horse is experiencing happiness. So there may be a discrepancy between research findings or evidence-based information and equestrians' interpretation of happiness in the horses, but more about this later. And here again, we have the results based on a question number 13. We ask our study participants, and we ask them if your horse could change one factor in their life to increase or improve their happiness, what do you believe he or she would change? So as you can see, the most frequently mentioned words were horse, grass, pasture, time, turnout time, field, paddock, herd. So based on that, we can see that the study participants may be informed about the positive impact turnout, paddock time, spending time with conspecifics like other horses in the herd, for instance, may have on horses positive emotions. But it also tells us that perhaps their horses may be lacking in turnout time and contact to other horses, which can actually compromise their welfare. And it may be good to further investigate this in other studies. All right, so this table gives you an overview over the results of another question we asked our study participants. And we provided the participants with 5 different scenarios, and you can find them on the left-hand side in the column. One is the horse is quietly eating in the stable. The horse is so-called bomb-proof and ridden. The horse is not reacting to loud noises or scary objects. The horse is very forward and energetic every time when it's being ridden or when he's being ridden. And the horse is quietly standing in the stall and not reacting to the environment. So as you can see, a large proportion of study participants thought that the horse that's quietly eating in his stable can be described as somewhat happy. So almost 50% thought that the horse is rather happy when it is quietly eating in the stable. A horse that's bomb-proof when ridden was considered as neither happy nor unhappy by 40%, almost 40% of participants, and 28% thought that the horse is rather happy. So it's still more on the positive side than the negative side. Horses that are not reacting to loud noises or scary objects were believed to be neither happy or unhappy, but again, rather on the happy side. So were horses that are very forward, energetic every time when being ridden. Like a large proportion, 36% believe that those horses are rather happy. And the horse that's quietly standing in the stall, not reacting to his environment, was thought to be neither happy or unhappy by 29%. But 40% thought that those horses are rather unhappy. And here again, you have a summary of the main significant findings based on the questions we asked the participants that were linked to particular scenarios, the table we just took a look at. So 38% of competitive riders or show riders thought that bomb-proof horses, when they are being ridden, are rather happy. And 47% of competitive riders thought that very forward and energetic horses, every time when they are being ridden, are rather happy. So again, as we discussed previously, the problem here, or the potential explanation, could be that the competitive riders or riders in general may experience positive emotions whenever they ride their horses or whenever they have a competitive success. And therefore, they may project their emotions onto the horses, and they may interpret very forward horses as happy horses. But we don't really know why the horse is actually very energetic, and we take a look at this later again. But there may be a misconception here, but more about this later. We also know that few numbers of competitive riders mentioned or indicated that they do not know how the horses are feeling when they are very energetic every time when they're being ridden, or bomb-proof when they're ridden, and when the horses are not reacting to loud noises. So the competitive or show riders in our sample showed really increased confidence in their ability to identify happiness or positive affective states in their horses. Almost 35% of all respondents who do not ride their horses thought that horses that are very forward or energetic every time they're being ridden are rather unhappy. And 31% of horse owners compared to survey participants not owning a horse thought that horses are rather happy when they do not react to noises or scary objects. Now, what does the literature tell us about this? Well, we know for sure that hurrying or being very forward when being ridden can indicate pain, especially in the back region. So not every horse that's actually very energetic or very forward may be happy. It may actually be the opposite. It may experience distress and pain. So we have to be careful whenever we interpret energetic horses or forward horses as happy horses. On the other hand, very energetic horses actually may not receive enough turnout or exercise possibilities. So they may just feel very full of themselves or very energetic, and they don't really know how to cope with their energy. So they may just be forward because they want to move. And another possible explanation could be that their diet's just too high in energy. And we couldn't investigate this in our study, of course. Now, what we also know on evidence-based information is that unresponsiveness, horses that are just not responding to their environment, can also indicate pain. And those horses, similar to so-called bomb-proof horses, may also be depressed, or they may have entered a state of learned helplessness, and so may horses not reacting to their environment, as discussed earlier. So again, we have to be very careful when we interpret quiet horses or bomb-proof horses, or when we think that those horses are happy, because they may also be in pain or depressed, or they may just be relaxed and happy. We don't know, but we have to look a bit more, a bit closer at this. So overall, do equestrian perceptions match research findings? It's not always the case, as you can see. So again, views and perceptions vary, and not everything is based on what we know from studies so far. And this again can be problematic because it may compromise horse welfare. So this slide gives you a brief summary of the main significant findings based on our last survey section, which is happiness in relation to the 5 welfare domains model. What we recorded is that 69% of all respondents thought that daily full body interaction with another horse or other horses would be most important to their horse's happiness. So this is quite large percentage of participants that actually recognizes the importance of daily contact to conspecifics. And almost 80% of all respondents indicated that full day turnout on a large paddock or field with one other horse or other horses would be most important to the horse's happiness. So this is also very encouraging, as we all know already. Contact to other horses and turnout, the ability to move and to graze is very important to our horse's emotional state, and it can enhance welfare. Almost 45% believe that a horse that's being ridden regularly, and we use the example 4 times per week, and turned out the remaining hours of the day, would make their horse most happy. So almost 50% actually thought that still being ridden is important to a horse's happiness, which most likely is not, based on what we know so far from scientific studies. And 19% thought that the horse which is not being ridden at all, but turned out 27, would be the most happy horse. And this is a very small number, since we know probably based on the nature, horses do not care about being ridden, but they enjoy all day turnout. Now, the main points based on the answers given are that participants in general recognize the importance of turnout and social interaction to horse happiness, which is very encouraging in terms of horse welfare, because we know that social interaction with other horses can indicate good welfare and therefore help create happy horses. The study participants' views on mixed turnout, which is turning out mares and geldings together, varied. I know it's a very common practice to separate mares and geldings when they are being turned out, but in the wild, also horses usually mix. They live in mixed herds, and this may actually compromise horses' needs to express normal behavior. So it is something maybe to rethink and maybe to incorporate into our daily management practices, mixed turnout. And a large proportion of respondents also indicated that they would like to improve their horses' turnout schedule or frequency and interaction with other horses. And this may indicate that some horses are lacking turnout time, access to grazing, and social interaction, something that is so important to create happy horses, to improve welfare, and therefore the welfare of some horses may be compromised. But again, this would require further investigation and further studies. So overall, the findings of our study may indicate a discrepancy between equestrian desired and actual horse husbandry practices. So what can we conclude based on the findings of our study? Well, we can say that a strong human-horse relationship may actually impact the subjective perception of equine affective states. And some participants also may have overconfidence in their perceived ability to recognize happiness or positive affective states in their horses. And this again may compromise horse welfare. We also observed that some behaviors that could potentially indicate negative emotions, such as pain, distress, were perceived as expression of happiness, for instance, bomb-proof horses or very forward horses. And the unconscious projection of self-experienced positive emotions onto their horses may obscure reality and potentially compromise welfare. So we have to be careful again whenever we assess and interpret our horse behavior and emotions, not to project our own emotions onto the horses. And on a positive note, the beneficial impact of daily turnout and social interaction with conspecifics on the well-being of horses has been recognized by a large respondent proportion. So that's very encouraging in terms of horse welfare. So this concludes my presentation, and thank you for your attention, and feel free to ask questions if you have any.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant. I would love to hear everyone's questions. I know that we have Tanja live in the Zoom room, and we can get any questions to her. I have to say my favourite points, the slide, Tanja, where you had the picture of the fancy horse and its rug like polished to the nines, and the scruffy muddy horse, and they're both thinking, oh, the poor horse. I thought that was just so clever, because I think so often we are giving horses what we think they want, and I just don't feel it is what they want, and your research just really summed that up beautifully. I particularly like how you're talking about mares and geldings living together and how beneficial that actually can be. I ride a lovely little horse called China. You might have heard me talking about her. I'm very, very fortunate to be given the ride on her this winter. And she lives in a mixed herd. They all live out 24/7. I think there's maybe about 9 of them out together. And it works surprisingly well. And it's far from how I've kept horses before. And it's brilliant, actually. It's so nice to see them being horses. So Tanja, can we bring you up on on the screen. Miri, if you could make that happen, that would be amazing. We can actually chat to Tanja and we can take any questions that we have. Love to hear people's takeaways. And yeah, as I said, if you've got any questions you would like answered, let's have them. But no, that was absolutely fascinating and really fed in to the rest of the talks, how we've been talking about the need to keep horses in a way that really suits them more than suits us. I think that is so important. Now, why can't I make Tanja come up? I have made Tanja come up and I've lost myself in doing so. Tanja, lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for being very sensible and pre-recording your presentation, so that all worked beautifully. Yeah, it was brilliant. Really appreciate your time. Anything else you'd like to add for us? Like, that was a fabulous presentation. I just wondered if there was anything else you would love us to go and implement. I think that's a really big key thing for the day. It's not just hearing all this really fascinating stuff, it's actually going to do something with it. So what would you say the biggest things that people could go and implement? I know you were talking about how we want to keep horses and the options that we have don't always match up. So yeah, any thoughts on how we can kind of make the best of what we've got, like Kate was saying earlier, and give our horses a better life, better experience?
Yeah, well, that's excuse me. I think that's one of the biggest problem when we keep horses. It's really difficult to meet their natural needs in many instances. Some people are lucky; they maybe have the possibility to board their horses at home, and they can provide them with an environment in which horses can be horses and can experience positive emotions, and others are maybe forced to board their horses at boarding barns, where there are a few restrictions when it comes to turnout or social interaction. So I think one key factor when we want to improve horse welfare is to trying to provide our horses with an environment in which they can have good experiences. And horses, that's how they are. They need to move. They need to be able to move, and it doesn't mean that they need to have a big field, but at least they should be outside for a large proportion of the day. And if you don't have access to let's say day turnout or 24/7 turnout, maybe you can try to offer them more possibilities to walk, for instance, like if you have a walker, or if you can just take them out twice a day. In hand walking, for instance, may help, or just taking them on a walk outdoors. The same with feed. The problem is that many boarding barns only feed twice a day or 3 times a day, and research findings tell us that ideally horses should have access to hay, to forage or grass every 4 hours, because that can help them to stay healthy. And it also can reduce boredom if you have stalled horses. On the other hand, it's not only about that we provide horses with a natural environment, it's also that we should educate ourselves, like continuously educate ourselves, and look at the newest or most recent research findings, because even this knowledge is constantly evolving and updating. So something that we thought maybe 10 years ago now already has been proven wrong, and there's different information out there. So that's one important factor, I believe, when we look at improving our horses' lives and quality of life. So yeah.
So true. Keeping our knowledge up to date, because things do move fast. That is brilliant. Thank you. Really interesting comment about how many people think their horses are bomb-proof and safe when actually they're shut down, depressed, not happy. And yeah, sadly, that is really common in riding schools. This comment is talking about how they took their own horse out of the riding school environment and how it's much happier now and a little bit spookier, which just goes to show that perhaps the horse was quite shut down in that environment, which is a real shame. And should a horse really be bomb-proof? Like, is that even a desirable thing when you think about it? Like I was describing the lovely horse I ride, she is really dependable. She's really reliable. She'll go past heavy traffic, but she's not, I wouldn't say she's bomb-proof. She took a very strong dislike to a load of walkers recently, but she is what I would say is a really safe horse, but she's very forward, and she's you know, wide awake and on it, but I can trust her, heavy traffic, scary things. Yeah, is bomb-proof even something we really want in a horse? Actually, when you pick it apart, I'm not sure it is.
Well, they are flight animals, first of all, so they can get startled easily, but you can habituate and desensitize them. So you can reduce the intensity and frequency of their flight response. And of course, I mean, we want to be safe. And if you have a beginner, like taking the first few lessons in horseback riding, you don't want a horse that's really, you know, very excitable and yeah. You prefer a horse that's a bit more quiet, because riding can be dangerous as well. I mean, you don't want to have a dead horse either, because, you know, it's always good if horses can still be horses and express their individual differences. But, you know, in working horses, for instance, police horses, we can't really use horses that are very excitable, and it may be dangerous for the normal people, for the police officer, her or himself, and for the horse as well. So it depends on the situation, I would say. And of course, you don't want to break a horse's spirit or yeah, cause horses that are just dead and they gave up and are depressed and maybe have entered a state of learned helplessness.
Definitely,
yeah, but
it's that balance, isn't it, between safety, appropriate training, so that you aren't getting an undesirable reaction, but of course the horse still having, yes, spirit and life in it, which I think something you do see in police horses. I mean, they're trained to a really high degree, but they do look like they still have plenty of spark and life in them. Thank you so much. I'd love to hear your opinion, Tanja, about moving away from the word happiness in horses. It's a difficult one, isn't it, as you've demonstrated in your presentation. What are your thoughts on moving away from that term towards equine ethology methods and applying much of what we already know about what horses need, the 3 freedoms, etc., and perhaps more positive reinforcement training, less expectations and demands on our horses? That would be really interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, it's my opinion right now, but you know, we somehow use horses for our benefit or for our fun, for our own pleasure. So I think it's important that we consider that horses are only horses and not there for us to meet our needs of showing off or competing or having fun. I mean, of course, horses are there also because riders or people still want to have them, so they still breed them. If, you know, less riders are present and less horse people are there, we might have much less horses existing because nobody needs horses nowadays. I mean, you know, before horses were needed for agriculture, now you rarely find a horse that's actually still working in this field. So I think once we start to realize that horses are individuals and they have special needs we need to meet, or they need to experience to live a good life, only then they can actually perform for us on a high level and be happy, like experience positive emotions. If you put too much pressure on your child, if you have a child, for instance, or on yourself even, it usually doesn't work out very well. So I think it's important that we don't put too much pressure on our horses and ourselves, and maybe just try to perceive or look at what's going on through the animal's eye as well, and try to understand why the horse is reacting in a certain way and what it needs actually to be happy and to perform properly.
Yeah.
So regarding positive reinforcement training also, it's just it was a very new study just recently conducted and presented at the last Equitation Science Conference. And actually the findings are that positive reinforcement alone may not always be positive. So it's always good to combine it to some extent with negative reinforcement, because even doing positive reinforcement training, horses can experience emotions of distress. I can check if somebody's interested and give you information about the study, but just because it's, you know, thought positive and the best for our horses, it's not. It can also be negative. So it depends on how it is done, and yeah.
Oh, that's so important to highlight that. Thank you. Really interesting comment, which is how some horses appear to like an environment which others don't. Like some quite like a busy yard and some love a quiet yard. And do you think this is due to their temperament or is it just conditioning and they've kind of got used to it? Any thoughts on that?
Um, I would like to ask you, like, how do you know the horse likes actually that they are this busy? Is it just coping with it? And how do you actually know the horse is happy there?
Yeah,
Um,
great question. Yes, and sometimes I think horses are just very good at coping,
yeah.
and we just think that they are happy. Yeah, great question.
It doesn't mean that the horse is actually maybe stressed out because the yard is busy. I mean, you can see in their behavior and yeah, the way they act, whether or not they are actually distressed in most instances. So yeah, I mean, horses get used to things, of course, like as humans the same. We get used to new situations as, trying to survive and to adapt, to change. But in the end, do we really know the horse is happy? We don't know. I mean, almost anything we do with them, we put them in artificial environments or semi-artificial environments, and it's somehow already not natural. So they get used to it. They have to get used to it. They have no other choice. And I'm not saying we should stop all this and just put them on the field. In the field, it doesn't work this way either. But it's just to consider the way we look at horses and how we interpret their behaviors and emotions. And I think that's important. And again, there is very embryonic research or little known about this subject yet. So there's a lot that has to be done in this field. First, for us to really understand how horses are feeling and how they express their emotions.
Oh, it's been so interesting. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed your talk, Tanya, and thank you very much for coming to answer questions. You've really brought so much to today. I'm really grateful for your time. Thank you very much. That's been brilliant.
I was happy.
Lots of people have enjoyed that. Thank you so much. Yeah, lots of praise, lots of thank you. So yes, thank you so much. We are going to be moving on to our next talk. So let me just pause the recording so we don't end up with a